I'm not sure why you would want to convert a starship into an apartment building, but it would probably be a pretty quick and easy way to increase the housing opportunities on a growing planet, create dorms for a space university, or just carry a large number of people around from place to place for various reasons. Let's take a look at some of the best ships to do this with. I'm Joey from Radio Free Coruscant, and these are the best ships for apartments in Star Wars. Tatooine Starliner. Our first ship to take a look at is the as-yet unidentified passenger liner seen in the Book of Boba Fett. Regrettably, we know absolutely nothing about this ship despite how cool its design was and how prominently it was featured in the show, but we can see that it would make a good ship to convert into an apartment building. It would need a bit more work than some of the other ships on this list, but I think it would turn out great. The ship had 2 decks of passenger seating that could be converted into a small number of modest apartments, as well as possibly 2 additional decks for boarding, storage, engineering, and escape pod access. On its passenger decks, it had 28 large windows for commuters to look out of and enjoy their flights. The ship appeared to have a fairly open interior, so you would need to divide out the apartments and build walls and such for them from scratch. I would construct them so that each apartment had one of these large windows in its living room or kitchen, and put the other rooms towards the center of the ship. You could potentially make fewer larger apartments and give each one 2 windows, but there are 7 windows per deck per side, so one apartment would have to be larger or smaller than the others. It would probably be easier to make them all the same, with 1 window each. The Tatooine Starliner also appeared to have 2 more windows per side on the shoulder sections next to its bridge module, which I suspect are some kind of lounge for passengers to get refreshments and hang out in flight. You could potentially convert these into an additional 2 apartments, possibly penthouse suites of sorts, but I think they would be better used as a common room for the apartment residents to mingle like on the original Starliner, or potentially even to hold a small convenience store for groceries and various household goods. It's pretty hard to say what other amenities the ship had, but we can also see an enormous communications array on its back, guaranteeing your residents a strong HoloNet connection to stay in touch with loved ones and business associates across the galaxy. None of the stats of the Tatooine Starliner are known, but we can estimate its size to be around 175 meters long by 70 meters wide and 30 meters tall, assuming a standard airlock diameter of around 3 meters. It likely had a top speed of around 800 kilometers per hour and a Class 1 or 2 hyperdrive. The ship would have probably required at least 10 crew, a captain, 2 pilots, a navigator, a loadmaster, and 5 engineering crew, plus likely at least 10 more passenger attendants. It's extremely difficult to tell how many passengers the ship could carry, as what little was built for its interior set doesn't really match the exterior of the ship, in terms of seeing how many rows of passengers were behind each window. As a rough guess, I would imagine there are 10 rows of at least 4 seats behind each window, for a total of 840 passengers behind the windows alone. There are almost certainly at least that many in the middle of the ship away from the windows, possibly more. That would give us a somewhat unsatisfying 1,680 passengers, which could probably be rounded up to 2,000. It could probably carry at least 500 tons of cargo and 1 year of consumables as well. If you were to convert it into an apartment, it would yield around 28 apartments that could hold between 28 and 112 residents, assuming no less than 1 and no more than 4 occupants per suite. The price of this ship is pretty hard to say, given prices are a lot more arbitrary than things like size or passenger capacity, but I would be willing to bet that it is around 1.5 million credits new or 700,000 used. Coruscant Freighter. Next up is the as-yet unnamed Coruscant Freighter, referred to as such because it's a freighter you often see on Coruscant. Now, while it may seem this way, not every species in the galaxy is the same size and shape as a human. Much smaller species often have to use a different set of ships than humanoids do, as demonstrated by the Anzellans and their speeder-sized ship in The Mandalorian and Grogu. In fact, I just made a video about the best ships for Anzellans to use. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. I don't think you would necessarily need to be as small as an Anzellan to make use of the Coruscant freighter as an apartment, but it would certainly be beneficial. There were several other small species that could fit into it relatively comfortably, but to my knowledge the Anzellans are the smallest sentient species in the galaxy at an average of 9 inches tall, so to them the ship would be absolutely palatial. The Coruscant freighter's cargo section consisted of 112 individual cargo compartments accessible from both inside and outside the ship, which would make a perfect framework for a block of 112 Anzellan apartments for up to 450 residents. The ship also likely had some internal crew and passenger spaces that could be reworked into Anzellan-sized grocery stores, movie theaters, and other amenities to go along with the apartments. At 1/8 the size of a human, living in this ship for an Anzellan would basically be as comfortable as living in an Acclimator-class assault ship for an average humanoid. The Coruscant freighter measured about 80 meters long by 16 meters wide and 34 meters tall. Its top speed was likely around 750 kilometers per hour, and I would expect it to have a Class 2 hyperdrive. It probably required 5 crew, at least when operated by human-sized beings, and could carry 5 to 10 passengers, 150 tons of cargo, and 2 months of consumables. The ship was in production for a long time, and its price likely changed many times throughout its production run, but I would expect it to be around 150,000 credits new or 70,000 used at today's prices. CR-225T. Now this next ship would not exactly be the most stylish place to live, especially in comparison to the other ships on this list, but the Corellian Engineering Corporation CR-225T Correctional transport would probably be pretty easy to convert into an apartment building. As a prison ship, it was already divided into a series of individual rooms that could be spruced up a bit into nicer accommodations. It would probably be wise to combine several former cells together into each apartment to give the residents a bit more room, but other than that, most of the work you'd need to do is purely cosmetic. As for how many apartments it could hold, though, we unfortunately don't really know. The ship doesn't have an official passenger capacity, and its internal layout isn't clear enough to figure it out that way. It had around 14 segments that I assume to be cell blocks along its sides, and each one probably had at least 10 cells in it for a total of perhaps 140 prisoners. Dividing that at least in half to combine cells and other rooms such as storage closets and droid facilities into the apartments, you would end up with around 70 homes for 70 to 280 residents. But that of course is just a complete guess. The CR-225T measured 173 meters long by 44 meters wide and 26.8 meters tall. It had a Class 1 hyperdrive and probably had a top speed of 750 kilometers per hour. It was armed with at least 4 dual laser cannon turrets, and seemingly required just 1 organic crew. It did require a large, unknown number of sentry and security droids though, as well as likely some maintenance droids and others. If it had a fully organic crew, I would expect something along the lines of around 25 to 30. The ship could carry 140 prisoners originally, and probably had room for a few dozen tons of cargo and at least a year of consumables. Its cost was probably something along the lines of 1.5 million credits new, or 500,000 used. Corellian Starliner. It would seem that obscure, unnamed background ships make some of the best apartments in the galaxy, as the so-called Corellian Starliner seen in Solo and Andor is the third one on this list. But this vessel was basically a cruise ship in space, so it would be super easy and efficient to convert one into an apartment. The existing passenger cabins could work fine on their own, though I would probably combine pairs of cabins together to give each resident a little more space, since they'd be living there full-time and not just for a few days. But how many cabins would it have had originally, and how many apartments could you build into it? The Prima-class cruise ship used by the Norwegian Cruise Line on Earth is about as long as my estimate for the size of the Corellian Starliner, and can carry over 3,000 passengers between its over 1,600 rooms. Unfortunately though, this ship appears to have significantly more of its volume dedicated to passengers than the Starliner, which has an enormous drive block at the rear taking up over a quarter of its length. The brand new NYK Cruises Asuka 3 is a much better fit for the size of the Starliner Sans engines, and can carry 744 passengers between 370 rooms. So the Starliner could probably have somewhere around that number as well. However, I would argue that the Starliner is actually closer in both vibe and purpose to something like the ocean liners of old. I don't know why I need to argue that, nobody else is saying anything about this ship. I'm just arguing with myself here. I wrote all that about cruise ships and then changed my mind, but didn't want it to go to waste, so you get 2 takes about the Starliner. You're welcome, or sorry, whatever. While often fairly luxurious, ocean liners were more intended for transportation between continents than for leisure, which better matches Cyril Karn's use of one to travel home to Coruscant after royally fumbling the operation on Ferrix and getting his entire company shut down. The famous RMS Lusitania is roughly equivalent in size to the usable volume of the Starliner at around 230 to 240 meters long by 27 meters wide. It was less than half the height of the Starliner though, so we'll just double our passenger and cabin numbers. The Lusitania carried nearly 2,200 passengers in over 280 cabins, if I'm interpreting its deck plans correctly, so 2 of them stacked on top of each other to form a Corellian Starliner would add up to around 4,000 passengers between 600 rooms. The Lusitania's cabins would not be a pleasant place to live forever though, so as mentioned we'll combine a few to make 300 apartments for 300 to 1,200 permanent residents aboard a Corellian Starliner apartment ship. The Corellian Starliner measured somewhere around 300 meters long by 68 meters wide and 60 meters tall. It probably had a Class 2 hyperdrive and a top speed of 850 kilometers per hour. I would guess it to require 15 regular flight crew and 60 passenger attendants, and could probably carry up to 4,000 passengers in its original configuration, 2,000 tons of cargo, and 1 year of consumables. It probably cost something like 3 million credits new or 1 million used. MO1400. And finally, one of the best apartment ships in Star Wars would have to be the Corellian Engineering Corporation MO1400 Purgill-class star cruiser. If the Corellian Starliner was a Titanic-style ocean liner, then the Purgill was absolutely a modern cruise ship. Outfitted with the finest luxury trappings, this line of starships carried hundreds of thousands of passengers over its centuries of service on vacations all across the galaxy. The ship had 100 passenger cabins and numerous entertainment venues including a luxury dining room, a climate simulator, a lounge, an atrium, a lightsaber training room, shops, and more. It also had a variety of other utilities, such as cargo holds, trash compactors, creature holding bays, a carbon freezing chamber, and a ventral docking bay. The Purgill-class was the pinnacle of luxury for over 200 years, but as these ships were eventually phased out and replaced with newer, even fancier cruise ships, they could likely be purchased for cheap and converted into a wide variety of vessels, including apartment ships. Instead of combining pairs of cabins together to form larger apartments like we have on other ships, we will instead keep the same number but consume some of the other rooms to expand the existing cabins instead. Some of its accoutrements, like the shops, could be useful to the residents of the ship, but the space used up by things like the lightsaber training pod and a dining hall would be better used for things like kitchens and living rooms. So, the ship would still have 100 apartments and hold 100 to 400 residents. The MO1400 measured 278 meters long by about 93 meters wide and 62 meters tall. It had a Class 5 hyperdrive and likely a top atmospheric speed of around 900 kilometers per hour. At least one of these ships was armed with 12 turbolasers, though I doubt that was standard across the class. The ship required 102 crew and could carry 100 to 500 passengers, and probably 2,000 tons of cargo and 1 year of consumables. Sadly, its price is unknown as well, but probably something like 5 to 10 million credits new, or 1 to 2 million used. And those are 5 of the best ships to convert into apartments in Star Wars. Let me know what you think of these ships, or what you would have included instead in the comments. Let me know if you agree with my apartment conversion methodology as well. It's very oversimplified, but should at least give a general idea of how each ship would function as an apartment building. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. RFC, out.